It's week 5, baby, and we've got just some projections, we've got just some rankings. So you will see the projections on the screen as I go through the rankings, and I just have to say right off of the bat, just given my, what you can see way over here is when it's red, it means it's a good matchup. When it's blue, it means it's a poor matchup, and then in between, white would just be kind of a neutral matchup. It's based on a few different factors, and ultimately, what I'm seeing is a week that could end up being disappointing for fantasy because I see a lot of players that are going to be started kind of in the blue neutral matchups, maybe not going to have big games, and then after I'm only going to go through, I think it's my top 43 wide receivers, and so right after that, there's a pile of red of guys who are probably not going to be started in most leagues. And so I think it could be one of those weeks where the wide receiver output is just a little bit disappointing. As I said, I won't be going through every ranked wide receiver of mine. There's some 90 plus that I have ranked, but you can find the complete rankings up on the website at www.theffforge.com. Those are down in the description. There's a link to the website. And you will see this is up at the website, same with some floors and some ceilings. And before we get into my week 5 rankings, I do want to do a recap of week 4 and how I did with my lovums and my fadeums. Usually I pick 3 for wide receivers. It appears I only picked 2 of each last week for the wide receiver position. So we'll cover those as well as covering how I did with my advice on for daily fantasy football, a couple of picks that I made there. And you can see my week 5 picks at the end of this video. So a bottom of the barrel priced kind of guy, Wan'Dale Robinson going up against Seattle at $3,000. I thought that for a smaller tournament, not like the huge massive tournaments, I thought he would be a good day. I didn't like the amount of time that he'd probably be on the field for those big tournaments. I think he had the potential to have like a 25-point day or anything like that, but I liked him at that price to come through, and he had the makings of a good day, did okay, but he just needed a touchdown in order to actually pay off, so he didn't really help your team for that price. You probably got a little bit of value out of him, but didn't help. Then for $6,100, I had Amari Cooper. That was pre-Deshaun Watson injury stuff there, so we're just going to wipe that off of the board. And for a contrarian play, I had Jahan Dotson at $4,800. He ended as the wide receiver 28, so you got something from him. He was fine for the cost, but not great, unfortunately. Then for my lovums, I had Deebo Samuel and Gabe Davis, and the Deebo Samuel would have been pre any knowledge of the injury that he was dealing with, so I think we can say he wasn't a love him by the time that we reached the weekend. And Gabe Davis at wide receiver 15 on the week did come through as a love him for me. And for my fadeums, I had Mike Evans and Garrett Wilson. Mike Evans got injured in the game, so we can't consider that a victory on him. And Garrett Wilson ended up as the wide receiver 30, so he did do all right. I don't know if he came through as a fade or if he was a little bit too good to consider that a victory or not. I'll leave that up to you. Let's get on to the rankings. And this week, we just have a small tier to start off the rankings. These are my must-starts: Justin Jefferson, Tyreek Hill, Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, A.J. Brown, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Cooper Kupp if he is playing. And, of course, if we get something like, oh, he's going to be highly limited, then maybe you back off of that a little bit, where I have him ranked at least. And then CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase to wrap up my top 9 must-start guys. So we don't really need to talk about these guys. If you have them, you play them. Once again, I am concerned about a lot of these guys and what the true upside this week is. I love Justin Jefferson this week, though. While you take this in, I do just want to point out, here is the expected range. It's just like, you know, you get one projected number on websites. Well, I'm giving you the range within the expectation of where they'll end up scoring. A single number is so inaccurate, this increases the accuracy by a fair bit. Let's say at least like a 33% chance. I don't know anymore because I just had to redo my projections. I used to know the percentages of my old projections. But this is something similar to what I originally did with my projections like 3 years ago, 2 years ago. And so I know the hit rate is probably around 33%, which is not too terrible. Once you make the range too wide, it's not going to give you any kind of information, so I like to keep it somewhat tight. And let's move on to the second tier because we've got a lot to get through. And this is a very small tier. And I've labeled this tier you don't really get a choice. You still have to start these guys. And that's going to be at wide receiver 10, Puka Nacua. And this is including the fact that I think Cooper Kupp will be returning this week. I still think he's very much a guy that you have to play and see what you get going up against Philadelphia. Do like the upside in that matchup. And I have both Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, and I'm still going to be playing both of them most likely. My next wide receiver that I do have is also, I have Brandon Ayuk. The matchup here stinks going up against Dallas, but you have to hope for the best with how he's been playing. At wide receiver 12, I have Devonta Smith, and then at wide receiver 13, Jalen Waddle, and these are two incredibly talented guys on two incredibly talented offenses in not terrible matchups. So despite what things have looked like as of late, you're still going to be starting them. And Nico Collins, I have at wide receiver 14. I do have concerns about the game flow for Houston's offense going up against Atlanta. I think Atlanta might be able to absolutely control the clock and control this game. But Nico has been fantastic so far this season. My single projection, I do still do a single projected number even though I don't post those, had him as the 6th best wide receiver on the week. He's been the 10th best wide receiver via my EV rankings, which is just similar to average fantasy points per week, except it takes the larger games, kind of equalizes them down, equalizes everything so that consistency gets favored over one huge game. You get one guy who has 60 points and then 2 0-point weeks, and then you get one guy who's had 20 points, 20 points, and 20 points over those same 3 weeks. I would take the guy who gets you 20 points each week. Personally, that's what I like, so that's how my EV system works. Let's move on to the third tier. A little bit of a bigger tier going all the way down to wide receiver 24 from wide receiver 15, and I've named this tier High Hopes, Busted Floors, and it doesn't get a whole lot better after this tier either. So we have Garrett Wilson in at wide receiver 15. You can see the matchup thingy likes it going up against Denver. Of course it does. And we've probably all been duped by Zach Wilson and how he looked last week. But still, they're facing Denver, as I stated this week. Even if we saw the normal Zach Wilson last week, we would still be somewhat high up on Garrett Wilson regardless this week. He probably would have been like my wide receiver 30, but I would have put a love him on him because I would have been like, the upside this week could be one of the good weeks, that kind of deal. Then at wide receiver 16, I have Calvin Ridley, who does have a Fatum tag going up against Buffalo. And he is a low floor, high ceiling guy this week. Buffalo is the 6th worst matchup for wide receivers, so you don't love that. Then we have Marquise Brown in at wide receiver 17 and Romeo Doubs in at wide receiver 18. I don't really have any strong feelings on either of these two in either direction. I kind of like the matchups and I kind of like them. Then Chris Olave I have at wide receiver 19. He's a Fatum for me, and this really comes down to not so much the matchup. Of course, New England's not a great matchup either, but they are banged up, quite banged up, and so they're probably a better matchup than not right now. They did add J.C. Jackson back onto their team, who did very well with them in their system previously. But for me, the big thing this week for all of the New Orleans wide receivers is that the Derek Carr injury, the AC joint injury of his, has typically... And of course, there's varying degrees to injuries. Just like, we all know about the high ankle versus a low ankle sprain, and the amount of time that could be the difference between how long they'll miss because of the difference in the type of the injury. But typically, AC joints have limited, taken quarterbacks off of the field for like 2 weeks. 17 days is the average recovery time for quarterbacks in the NFL. And Chris Olave has, so 2 to 3 weeks, I would put that at. It came back in week 1, and we saw that affect how he had to play, and I think that he's still going to be limited next week with how he's playing. And I don't like that for the wide receivers. Then we have DJ Moore in at wide receiver 20, going up against Washington, and this could be a good matchup for Fields and Moore. Washington has been pretty bad against deep passes so far this season, and surprisingly, DJ Moore actually projected as the 12th receiver in my projections for that single number projection. Looks pretty good, like a pretty solid play this week. Of course, if you have DJ Moore, you're not feeling super good about putting him probably. Then Michael Pittman in at wide receiver 21, and much like DJ Moore, I was close to giving him a love him tag. I was close to giving DJ Moore a love him tag this week. Tennessee for Michael Pittman is a good matchup. Wide receivers have done pretty well against them, and I think that there is a chance that Tennessee might be able to limit the damage that Anthony Richardson will be able to do with his feet on the ground. And as the team adjusts to that throughout the game, that should cause them to be passing more, and Michael Pittman could definitely benefit from them passing more once again against a defense that doesn't do so great against wide receivers, pretty porous. Then at wide receiver 22, we have Jacoby Myers. He ranked as 11th in my projections. I do have a love 'em tag on him going up against Green Bay. I do think that they will be getting Jimmy Garoppolo back. This is dependent on them getting Jimmy back, Garoppolo. Assuming that happens, then I love Jacoby Myers this week. I think he's really been a good option for fantasy while Jimmy's been the quarterback. My main concern for Jacoby this week is that Green Bay might be getting healthier on the defensive side of the ball, and most notably of concern for Jacoby Myers is that they might be getting Eric Stokes back in their cornerback room, which it could make them a fairly elite cornerback group overall and just make things tougher for this offense. So there is some concern there, but I'm going to give it a love 'em anyways. Then Zay Flowers going up against Pittsburgh. You got to like that matchup. They might be able to run the ball throughout a lot of the second half, but still, it's a good week for Zay Flowers. And Terry McLaurin going up against Chicago. Same thing there. It's a good week to put Terry McLaurin out there. That'll bring us to my fourth tier here, and this is the tier. Yeah, we get a little bit, go from a question mark to a little bit of excitement, kind of as this tier goes along. So the it's our Christian Kirk here going up against Buffalo. Just talked about how tough of a matchup that is, so I don't love that. But, good floor, just don't love the ceiling necessarily this week. And then Deebo Samuel just coming off of that injury. It's a really tough matchup. We saw how that turned out last week. You can see right here the matchup grade really doesn't like him there, that deep blue. I'm probably playing him at this point, but if you wanted to sit him, I'm cool with that if you have other guys that you like. Gabe Davis and Tank Dell are both going to be kind of in-betweeners, total betweeners between the two A's for this tier. I don't really have strong feelings either way about starting or sitting them this week. I will say that Tank Dell still projected really well. He was a top 20 wide receiver in my projections. Then we get to some of the where there's a little bit of excitement, but it's like a nervous excitement, like a puppy who pees on the floor kind of excitement. And that's going to be for DeAndre Hopkins right off the bat here at wide receiver 30. Did I say anything about Christian Watson here? I don't think I did. So Christian Watson, it's a good matchup going up against Las Vegas. I'm tempering my expectations for him a little bit here, but I'm happy to play Christian Watson if I have him. DeAndre Hopkins, you can see the redness over there by his name. Good matchup here against Indianapolis. They've been no better than Tennessee as far as the amount of points that they've allowed up to wide receivers in fantasy football, but we all know the concerns with DeAndre Hopkins. Still, I'm going to bestow my powers upon him and give him a love 'em. Just a quick heads up, he did project as my wide receiver 40 in my projections, so it doesn't project so well. Hopefully the health comes along a little bit better this week. He's been targeted pretty heavily, and this could be a week where we see a good DeAndre Hopkins, but, I'm only so excited about it. And then we have Adam Thielen and Jordan Addison at wide receivers 31 and 32 to wrap this little tier up, and Thielen is tough to trust the quarterback for him, Bryce Young, but he projected as the wide receiver 10 for me, and they opened up as 8.5-point dogs via the Vegas lines this week, so I think he has a high floor in this matchup, as high of a floor as anybody has, based on 2 out of the 3 performances that came directly from Bryce Young, not even including the Andy Dalton game. So all in all, I think you can put Thielen and be somewhat excited, just, maybe not get a great ceiling out of it. And then Jordan Addison at wide receiver 32 is in a tough matchup, but Minnesota is one of those offenses that can score on any defense. And Kansas City will have no problem scoring on their offense, as no team really has much of a problem scoring against their defense, I think Minnesota is going to be coming out from the beginning of the game plan-wise, just planning on chucking it all game. And so that could be a good recipe for Jordan Addison. That'll bring us to the final tier here, going from wide receiver 33 down to wide receiver 43. Courtland Sutton, George Pickens, Jerry Jeudy, Tutu Atwell, Michael Wilson, Jaden Reed, Michael Thomas, Rashee Rice, Jahan Dotson, Tyler Boyd, and Drake London. And so I do have a little bit of a write-up on each of these guys, so I'll just go through those. Courtland Sutton, I don't have a good feeling about Denver this week. This is a vibes thing for this game, given this matchup and everything. And I talked a little bit about it in the quarterback rankings video. So I'm giving a Fatum tag to Courtland Sutton, expecting my thoughts on this game to come true. But Courtland Sutton has had a good year so far. He did project as the wide receiver 17 this week, despite it not being a great matchup for him. So keep that in mind if you have Courtland Sutton and you think he'll do good again. But the matchup, I don't really like things for them this week. And then George Pickens, I like the quarterback situation less than I did before, which wasn't great. Then Jerry Jeudy going up against the New York. It's the same thing, just see what I said about Courtland Sutton. Tutu Atwell. Nice lightning hot matchup here against Philadelphia for him. He projected as a top 20 wide receiver. It's a high upside matchup, but with the return of Cooper Kupp, that just does concern me a little bit about the amount of opportunities that Tutu will end up getting going forward. So I'm just being a little bit conservative with my ranking of Tutu this week. And Michael Wilson, we have in at wide receiver 37, and Jaden Reed at 38, and they're just fine for me. I don't really have anything to add to those guys. I like the matchups just fine there. I like the players just fine, but, you know, I'm not forcing them into my lineup either. Michael Thomas at wide receiver 39. It's the AC joint for Derek Carr that I talked about earlier is a concern for me, so I'm not too excited about playing Michael Thomas. Rashee Rice, on the other hand, I do get a little bit excited for, but it's a very risky start, of course, given what he's done so far this season. But they are going up against Minnesota. It's been really easy to pass against Minnesota. Teams love to do that. And so I like this to be a breakout week for Rashee Rice, and so that's why I'm giving him a love him tag for me. And you can see the little heating gauge here is bright red for Rashee Rice. Likes the matchup as well. Jahan Dotson, and if he is healthy, I actually think that he's a fine play this week. They face Chicago, so I like the matchup. It really hasn't gone too bad if you play guys going up against Chicago for the most part. The big question, though, is his health, and that would give me pause about actually starting him. It depends what your wide receivers look like, you know. Then we get to Tyler Boyd, and some things to like here. It's a good matchup going up against Arizona. T. Higgins is out, I believe. I don't think that's official yet, but he should be out this week. And with the injury and the crappy O-line to Joe Burrow, Joe Burrow has been peppering the short targets quite a bit, and Boyd lives in the short to intermediate range. That's where he's very, very good. So I know they move him usually to the outside, kind of put him in T. Higgins' role when he's been missing, I believe, usually, or he gets out there quite a bit more, but I think they still call the game plan a little bit differently. It could be a good week for Tyler Boyd, and not somebody I'm trying to jam into my lineup, but there's some situations going that are good for him. And Drake London, as the last wide receiver we will look at, I'm ranking him higher than the projection wants me to. He projected, I believe, as like wide receiver 50 for me or something. And maybe I shouldn't have him ranked this high because, surprisingly, Houston is the second worst matchup for wide receivers so far on the season. And that brings us to some DFS buys, and I forgot to fill this out, so let's look at it live. We're going to put Marquise Brown at 5,000 as my mid-tier buy. Yeah, I'm going to make my contrarian play DeAndre Hopkins at 5,700. That still feels like a lot of people are going to look over that given what he's done this season, despite it being a really good matchup. I don't know if that's truly a contrarian play. I'm just taking a guess because I know I look at it and I'm like, I don't know if I want to trust that. But people also might get excited about that this week, so I could be totally off base on that. You know what? If we're going to go down to the barrel, we're not going all the way to the bottom of the barrel here with this, but close enough. At 3,900, you can get Darnell Mooney, who popped off a little bit in week one. This is, once again, with Washington. They have struggled against the deep passes. That's where you like to hit Darnell Mooney up. So it could be a Darnell Mooney week this week. And, if he has a week, usually it's going to be pretty big. So we'll do that. That's it for this episode. Please like, comment, subscribe. If you have any questions on starting, sitting, feel free to ask them, and I'll get to you as soon as I can. Peace out.